Accustomed to having everything, he prepared the perfect marriage proposal. Luxury, diamonds, an orchestra, but none of that impressed her. With a firm no, she shattered all his certainties. What was she hiding? Why did she refuse? In seeking answers, he discovered a love that no money could buy. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Ethan Carter's office, illuminating his mahogany desk as he analyzed the latest financial reports of Carter Enterprises. At 35, Ethan had further consolidated the empire his grandfather had started and his father had expanded. The young entrepreneur adjusted his custom-made Italian tie, an automatic gesture he performed whenever something in the numbers before him bothered him. "Mr. Carter," his secretary's voice sounded over the intercom. "The board meeting will start in 5 minutes." Ethan sighed, rising from his leather chair. Another meeting where he'd have to explain his decisions to a group of executives who, despite being competent, couldn't see beyond the immediate numbers. His latest expansion project, which included revitalizing a less affluent area of the city for the construction of a new business complex, was generating heated debates. As he walked through the mirrored corridors of the 40th floor, employees greeted him with respect and a hint of fear. Ethan knew his presence commanded respect, something he had learned early on from his father. "A Carter never shows weakness," the patriarch used to say, and Ethan took that teaching seriously, perhaps too seriously. The meeting went as expected. 2 hours of intense discussions where Ethan defended his vision with characteristic firmness. In the end, as always, his opinion prevailed. Not by imposition, but because his analyses were invariably accurate. Need to unwind, he thought to himself as he descended in the private elevator to the garage. His black Porsche was waiting, but something made him change his mind. Instead of driving to his penthouse in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city, he decided to do something different. He dismissed the driver and started walking through the downtown streets, something he hadn't done in years. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Ethan observed people passing by, all absorbed in their own lives, when something caught his attention. A small bookstore, one of those that seemed to bravely resist the digital age, with a charming and well-maintained window display. "Whispered pages," said the sign in slightly worn golden letters. Moved by a curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time, Ethan pushed the wooden door, making a delicate bell chime. The aroma of old books and fresh coffee invaded his senses, instantly transporting him to the afternoons of his childhood, when his mother would take him to choose books before illness took her away. "Can I help you?" The sweet voice caught him by surprise. Behind the counter was a young woman who couldn't have been more than 28, with brown hair tied in an unpretentious bun and honey-colored eyes that conveyed a serenity he had never encountered before. She wore a simple blouse and an apron with the bookstore's logo, but there was something about her presence that made him momentarily forget who he was. "I was just looking," he replied, realizing his voice sounded different, less formal, less controlled. "Feel free," she smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "If you need any suggestions, just let me know. My name is Olivia." Olivia. The name echoed in his mind as he pretended to examine the shelves, but his eyes always returned to her, the way she treated other customers, her sincere laugh as she chatted with an elderly gentleman about a poetry book, the delicacy with which she handled the volumes. Everything about her seemed authentic, real, different from the artificial world he was accustomed to. After a few minutes, Ethan randomly chose a book, more as an excuse to approach the counter. When she picked up the volume to register the sale, their fingers touched briefly, and he felt something he couldn't explain. An electric current, a different warmth, a sensation that something important was happening. 100 years of solitude, she commented, looking at the book. "It's an excellent choice. Have you read it before?" "Actually, no," he admitted, feeling strangely vulnerable for revealing his ignorance about something. "Then you have a beautiful journey ahead." Olivia smiled again, and this time Ethan felt his heart race. Garcia Marquez has a unique way of telling stories. This book in particular is about love, family, destiny, and how sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves. Ethan paid for the book, noting how she seemed completely unaware of who he was. Something rare in his life. When he left the bookstore, the sky was already dark, but he felt lighter, as if he had discovered something precious. That night, in his luxurious penthouse overlooking the entire city, Ethan couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, financial reports and business strategies didn't occupy his thoughts. Instead, he could only think of honey-colored eyes and a sincere smile. He picked up the book he had bought and began to read. Garcia Marquez's words enveloped him, and he found himself imagining how it would be to hear Olivia talking about each page, each character. An idea began to form in his mind. He would return to the bookstore the next day, and the day after, and as many times as necessary until he understood why a simple bookseller had managed, in a few minutes, to do something that none of the women he had met at parties and social events had managed, to genuinely spark his curiosity. What Ethan didn't know was that this seemingly casual encounter would completely change his life, challenging everything he thought he knew about love, value, and happiness. The small bookstore whispered pages would become the setting for a story that all the money in the world couldn't buy. Olivia closed the bookstore door precisely at 7 p.m., as she did every day. The bell chimed one last time as she put away her apron and picked up her worn bag, a gift from her mother on her last birthday. Her thoughts wandered to the mysterious man who had appeared earlier. There was something different about him, a mixture of power and loneliness that intrigued her. "Don't be silly, Olivia," she muttered to herself, adjusting her scarf to face the cool night. She had more important things to worry about. Her mother, Sarah, was waiting for her at home, and she still needed to stop by the market to buy medication and some groceries. The path to her house was long, but Olivia liked to walk. She saved bus money and took the opportunity to organize her thoughts. She passed by Joe's bakery, which always kept discounted day-old bread for her, and by Rose's flower shop, which occasionally gave her flowers that hadn't been sold. "Olivia, dear," Rose called out, "I have some daisies left over today. Your mother loves daisies, doesn't she?" "Rose, you're an angel," Olivia smiled, accepting the small bouquet. "Mom will love them." As she walked, Olivia reflected on her life. She wasn't rich, but she considered herself happy. She had a job she loved, surrounded by books that had been her passion since childhood. Her mother, despite her health difficulties, was her best friend and greatest example of strength. Financial difficulties were constant, but they always managed to get by. The apartment where they lived was small, on the third floor of a building without an elevator, but Olivia kept it impeccably tidy. The walls were decorated with family photos and shelves full of books, many of them gifts from loyal customers of the bookstore who knew of her passion for reading. "Mom, I'm home," she announced as she opened the door. Sarah was sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting. At 65, she maintained a natural elegance, even though illness had left its mark on her face. "I'm glad you're back, honey. How was your day at the bookstore?" Olivia began to tell about her day while preparing dinner, a simple soup with the vegetables she had bought at the Sunday market. She hesitated for a moment before mentioning the mysterious customer, but ended up telling. Her mother had always been her confidant. "He seemed lost," Olivia explained, stirring the soup. "Not really lost, but like someone who's looking for something without knowing exactly what." Sarah smiled in that wise way that only mothers can. "Sometimes people need to get a little lost to find their true path, honey." Dinner passed quietly, with Olivia reading a bit to her mother afterward, as they did every night. It was her favorite time of day, when they could forget their worries and lose themselves in the pages of a good story. The next morning, Olivia arrived early at the bookstore as always. She had a pile of new books to catalogue and some orders to organize. She had barely finished putting on her apron when the doorbell rang. Her heart gave a little jump when she saw who it was. The man from the day before, now wearing an impeccable suit that definitely cost more than her salary for several months. "Good morning," he said with a shy smile that contrasted with his imposing appearance. "I finished the book." Olivia couldn't contain her surprise. "You read 100 Years of Solitude in One Night. Actually, I read until 3 in the morning, he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. I couldn't stop. You were right about it being an incredible journey. Something in the way he spoke, as if each word was carefully chosen, fascinated her. In the next few minutes, they found themselves immersed in a passionate discussion about the book. Olivia noticed how his eyes sparkled when he talked about the passages that had touched him the most. "Sorry," he said suddenly, looking at his expensive wristwatch. "I need to go. I have a meeting in well now." "Of course," Olivia smiled, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment she felt. "Come back any time. We always have good reading suggestions." "Ethan," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Ethan." "Olivia," she responded, shaking his hand and feeling again that strange electric current from their first touch. After he left, Olivia tried to concentrate on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to Ethan. There was something about him that intrigued her, something beyond the obvious social difference between them. It was as if behind that facade of a successful businessman, there was someone desperately looking for something real. What Olivia didn't know was that at that exact moment, Ethan was in his meeting room, completely distracted. While his executives discussed numbers and strategies, he could only think of honey-colored eyes and how a simple discussion about literature had made him feel more alive than all the million-dollar deals he had ever closed. On the small side table next to her favorite armchair, Olivia's cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was an email from the book distributor informing that a large order had been placed for the bookstore, all the classics of world literature in special editions. The sender was anonymous, but the value of the purchase made her heart race. Who would spend so much money on books? The answer was 40 floors above the ground, in a meeting room overlooking the entire city, where Ethan Carter smiled discreetly as he signed documents, knowing he had found a way to get closer to Olivia's world without scaring her with his reality. In the weeks that followed, the routine of the small bookstore whispered pages gained a new element. Ethan appeared almost every day, always at different times, as if testing the moments when the store was emptier. Olivia began to notice a pattern in his visits. He always arrived with specific questions about some book he had read, but the conversations inevitably extended to other subjects. "I can't believe you've never read Jane Austen," Olivia commented on a particularly quiet afternoon while organizing a new shipment of books. The mysterious orders of special editions continued to arrive, and the bookstore was more well-stocked than ever. "I always thought they were, well," Ethan hesitated, helping her carry a heavy box, his fingers lightly brushing against hers. "Too romantic for a busy businessman?" she teased, trying to ignore the shiver she felt at his touch. "Something like that," he laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent during his visits. "But you're right. I need to expand my literary horizons." Olivia picked up a copy of Pride and Prejudice from the shelf. "Start with this one. I think you'll identify with Mr. Darcy more than you imagine." Ethan held the book, his eyes meeting hers. "Because of the pride?" "Because of the transformation," she replied softly, averting her gaze to continue her task. That same night, in her apartment, Olivia was preparing dinner while her mother watched her from the kitchen table. The smell of chicken with vegetables filled the cozy environment. "Did he come back today?" Sarah asked with a knowing smile on her lips. Olivia blushed slightly. "Mom, don't start. He's just a customer." "A customer who shows up every day, buys dozens of books, and spends hours talking to you," her mother pointed out. "Olivia, I'm not blind. I see how your eyes sparkle when you talk about him." "We're from different worlds, Mom," Olivia sighed, stirring the sauce more forcefully than necessary. "You saw the car he drives, the watch he wears. He probably has more money in his bank account than we would earn in several lifetimes." Sarah took her daughter's hand, making her stop. "And since when does money define who a person is?" "Since Dad abandoned us for that rich woman," Olivia replied, her voice trembling. "Since I saw you work 3 jobs to raise me alone, money may not define who a person is, but it defines how they see the world." On the other side of the city, in his office on the top floor, Ethan was absorbed in similar thoughts. The book Olivia had recommended was open on his desk, but his mind wandered to the simplicity with which she saw life, to the passion in her eyes when she talked about literature. "Mr. Carter?" His secretary interrupted his reverie. "You have a call from your aunt on line 1. Ethan sighed, already knowing what was coming. "Regina, you can put her through." "Ethan, darling," his Aunt Beatrice's affected voice sounded over the phone. "Why didn't you attend last night's dinner?" Alexandra was tremendously disappointed. "Aunt, we've talked about this," he replied, massaging his temples. "I'm not interested in arranged dates." "But darling, you need to think about the future. Alexandra comes from an excellent family. It would be a perfect union. For business and—" "I'm not going to get married for business, Aunt," he interrupted her, his voice firmer. "And I need to hang up now. I have an important meeting." It wasn't exactly a lie. He did have a commitment, but it wasn't a meeting. He had promised himself that today would be the day he would invite Olivia to dinner. After weeks of frequenting the bookstore, he felt he had finally built a real connection with her. What Ethan didn't know was that, at that exact moment, Olivia was receiving an unexpected visit at the bookstore. An elegantly dressed woman with expensive jewelry and an air of superiority entered the store. "So this is where my nephew has been spending so much time," the woman commented, looking around with barely disguised disdain. "You must be Olivia." Olivia felt her stomach sink. The woman had the same eyes as Ethan, but without the warmth she so admired in them. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "Dear," Beatrice smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I came to do you a favor. Ethan is a very busy and important man. He has responsibilities, a position to maintain, this enchantment he feels for. You is just a phase. Soon he'll realize he needs someone from his own social circle." Olivia maintained her composure. Years of caring for her sick mother had given her the strength to face difficult situations. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I think there's a misunderstanding. Mr. Carter is just a customer of the bookstore." "Excellent," Beatrice replied, adjusting her designer handbag. "Then you won't mind keeping this relationship strictly professional. After all, you wouldn't want to be responsible for ruining his future, would you?" After the woman left, Olivia allowed herself to sit, her legs trembling. Her mother's words about money not defining a person echoed in her mind, but now they seemed distant, overcome by the harsh reality she had just encountered. When Ethan arrived at the bookstore an hour later, with an anxious smile full of expectations, he found only a temporary employee at the counter. Olivia had asked for the rest of the day off, claiming she wasn't feeling well. In her small apartment, embraced by her mother who was knitting silently, Olivia cried, knowing she would have to make a decision that would break her heart, and possibly Ethan's too. But sometimes she thought, loving someone means letting them go before it's too late for both. The days that followed were an exercise in self-control for Olivia. Each time the doorbell rang, her heart leaped, both fearing and hoping it would be Ethan. When he did appear, she kept herself busy, delegating the customer service to her new assistant, Megan, a college student who had started working part-time at the bookstore. "Are you sure she can't help me?" Ethan asked once again, his gaze fixed on Olivia, who pretended to be very concentrated on cataloging books at the back of the store. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," Megan replied, following the instructions she had received. "Olivia is quite busy with inventory, but I can help you find what you're looking for." Ethan sighed, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Olivia observed in the reflection of the window. Each time she saw him like this, her heart tightened, but Aunt Beatrice's words echoed in her mind. "You wouldn't want to be responsible for ruining his future, would you?" At home, Sarah observed her daughter with growing concern. Olivia was quieter, spending more time reading, not for pleasure as she always had, but as a form of escape. On a particularly difficult night, when she found her daughter crying alone on the balcony, she decided it was time to intervene. "You're doing it again, honey," she said softly, sitting down next to Olivia. "Doing what, Mom?" "Hiding, protecting yourself. Just like when you were a child and your classmates hurt you, you would take refuge in books and build walls around yourself." Olivia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "It's different now, Mom. It's not about protecting myself. It's about protecting him." And who said he needs protection? Sarah questioned, her voice gentle but firm. Olivia, you're doing exactly what your father did to us, making decisions for the other person, thinking you know what's best for them. The words hit Olivia like a slap. She had never thought about it from that angle. Was she really repeating the pattern she so criticized? Meanwhile, in the Carter Enterprises office, Ethan was having his own battle. Sitting in his leather chair, he looked out the window at the city sprawling below, lights beginning to come on in the twilight. Ethan, darling, his aunt entered without knocking, as she always did. I have great news. I managed to arrange a dinner with the Rothstein family for next Saturday. Their daughter, Amanda, just got back from Harvard, and enough. Shan't Ethan interrupted her, his voice calm but icy. Have you been interfering in my personal life? Beatrice hesitated for a moment, but soon regained her composure. I don't know what you're talking about, darling. Don't lie to me. He stood up, his eyes fixed on hers. Olivia has been avoiding me since last week, and considering your sudden interest in arranging dates for me, it's not hard to connect the dots. Ethan, be reasonable, Beatrice tried to argue. That girl is lovely, of course, but you need to think about your future, the company, your social position. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe I'm tired of living just to maintain a social position? He questioned, his voice betraying an emotion he rarely showed. That maybe I want something real for the first time in my life. Real? His aunt laughed humorlessly. What's real, Ethan? That tiny bookstore, that simple life? You wouldn't last a month living like that. You don't know me as well as you think, he replied, grabbing his jacket. And you made a mistake by interfering. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have something important to resolve. Ethan drove to the bookstore but found it closed. On the glass door, a notice informed, "Closed for inventory." He knew it was an excuse. Olivia was hiding from him, and now he understood why. On the other side of the city, in her apartment, Olivia was finishing decorating the small Christmas tree they always set up early, a tradition she had kept since childhood. Her hands trembled slightly as she hung the simple ornaments, some already faded by time. "Honey," Sarah called from the armchair where she was knitting a scarf. "Someone's knocking at the door." Olivia frowned. They weren't expecting visitors at this hour. When she opened the door, her heart stopped. Ethan was standing there without his jacket, his tie loose, looking completely out of place in the simple hallway of the building. "We need to talk," he said simply. Olivia felt the weight of the past weeks on her shoulders. His aunt's words, her own fears, the memories of her father's abandonment. Everything seemed to converge on this moment. Ethan, no, he gently interrupted her. First, you're going to listen to me. After that, if you still want me to leave, I will. But I'm not going to let anyone, not even my aunt, decide for us what we can or cannot be. His gaze was so intense, so sincere, that Olivia felt her defenses beginning to crumble. How could she continue protecting herself when her heart was screaming to let him in? Sarah observed the scene from the living room, a serene smile on her lips as she continued her knitting. Sometimes she thought love needed a little push or a good shake to break down the barriers we build around it. The small apartment fell silent for a few moments. Sarah, with the wisdom that only years bring, discreetly rose from her armchair. "I'm going to make some tea for us," she announced, heading to the kitchen and giving the two the space they needed. Olivia led Ethan to the simple but cozy living room. He observed the environment with genuine interest, the photographs on the walls, the shelves full of books, the small half-decorated Christmas tree. Every detail told a story of love and care. "So this is where you live," he commented softly, his eyes lingering on a childhood photo of Olivia with her mother. "It's nothing compared to what you're used to," she replied, sitting on the worn but comfortable couch. "It's perfect," Ethan said sincerely, sitting next to her. "It has soul. It has life. Unlike my apartment that looks like it came out of a decorating magazine, but has nothing of me in it." Olivia nervously played with the hem of her blouse. "Ethan, your aunt." "My aunt has no right to interfere in my life," he gently interrupted. "Her, and much less to make you feel that you're not enough." "But she's not completely wrong," Olivia argued. finally finding the courage to look into his eyes. "We're from different worlds. You own a business empire, attend gala parties, travel first class. I work in a bookstore, live in a small apartment, and sometimes have to choose between buying new books or a pair of shoes." Ethan moved closer, taking her hands in his. "And that's exactly why I fell in love with you." Olivia's heart stopped for a moment. "What? You're real, Olivia. Every smile of yours, every opinion about a book, every gesture of affection towards your mother, everything about you is authentic. Do you know how many people in my world are like that? None. They all wear masks. They all have hidden agendas." Sarah returned with a tray of tea, placing it on the small coffee table. "I'm going to rest a bit in the bedroom," she announced with a knowing smile. When they were alone again, Ethan continued, "In the past few weeks, I've spent more time in that bookstore than at any social event. And do you know why? Because there, talking to you about literature, about life, about dreams, I feel like myself for the first time in years." Olivia felt tears forming in her eyes. "But your world, my world can wait," he interrupted her. "Actually, my world needs to change. You showed me that without even realizing it. Every time I enter that bookstore, every time I see how you treat people, how you genuinely care about each customer, I learn something new about what really matters in life." "I'm afraid," she admitted in a whisper. "Afraid of not being enough, of disappointing you, of you realizing that you need someone more sophisticated," he completed with a tender smile. "Olivia, sophistication is the last thing I need in my life. I need truth. I need someone who looks at me and sees Ethan, not the heir to Carter Enterprises. Someone who recommends books to me not to impress, but because they believe they can transform me. Someone like you." Thunder sounded in the distance and raindrops began to hit the window. Olivia stood up, walking to the balcony. Ethan followed her. "When I was little," she began, looking at the wet city, "my father used to say that rain washed the soul, brought new beginnings. He said that before abandoning us for a more luxurious life. Since then, I've had difficulty believing in new beginnings." Ethan approached, standing beside her. "Then let's rewrite that story. I'm not your father, Olivia. I'm not looking for a more luxurious life. I already have that, and I know it doesn't bring happiness. I'm looking for a truer life." "And if it doesn't work out?" she asked, turning to him. "And if it does," he responded, gently touching her face. "I'm not asking you to change who you are. In fact, I'm asking for exactly the opposite, for you to continue being exactly who you are and help me rediscover who I am." The rain was falling harder now, but they barely noticed. Olivia felt her heart beating erratically, her defenses crumbling one by one in the face of the sincerity she saw in Ethan's eyes. "There's something you need to know," he said suddenly. "Those special book orders for the bookstore, it was me." Olivia's eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I wanted to help, but I knew you wouldn't accept direct help. Because every time I saw your eyes light up when receiving new books, my day got better. Because I fell in love not just with you, but with everything you represent. Integrity, simplicity, genuine love for life and people." From the bedroom, Sarah listened to the conversation with a smile on her lips. She might not be able to see what was happening on the balcony, but she knew her daughter well enough to know that the walls she had built around her heart were finally beginning to fall. On the balcony, under the rain that was starting to splash, on them Olivia felt something change inside her. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe she was repeating her father's mistake by making decisions for others. Maybe it was time to give a chance not just to Ethan, but to herself. "It won't be easy," she murmured. "The best stories never are," he replied, a smile forming on his lips. "Didn't you teach me that yourself with all those books?" And there, with the rain-illuminated city as a backdrop, Olivia finally allowed her heart to speak louder than her fears. When Ethan leaned in to kiss her, she didn't back away. For the first time in a long time, she didn't think about the past or the future, just the present, the warmth of his lips, the truth of her feelings. The rain continued to fall, but now, as her father used to say, It really seemed to bring the promise of a new beginning. The days that followed brought a new routine to the Whispered Pages bookstore. Ethan continued to appear daily, but now there were no more pretexts about books or need to disguise his true motives. The change didn't go unnoticed by regular customers, who observed with knowing smiles the exchanges of glances between the beloved bookseller and the elegant businessman. "So, this is the famous Ethan," Joe commented one morning as he delivered the fresh bread he now made a point of bringing to the bookstore every day. His experienced eyes evaluated the young entrepreneur who was helping Olivia organize a new shipment of books. "Famous?" Olivia asked, blushing slightly. "Well, my dear, you think people don't notice. This neighborhood is like a small town. Everyone knows everything," he laughed kindly. "And I must say he seems different from the rich folks we usually see around here." Olivia observed Ethan from afar, smiling as she saw him completely absorbed in the task of organizing the books, his Italian tie slightly loose and his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He had insisted on helping her before going to the office, claiming he needed to learn more about how the bookstore operated. "You don't have to do this," she said when they were alone. "You must have more important commitments." Ethan stopped what he was doing, turning to her with that intense look that always made her heart race. "Nothing is more important than being here with you, learning about your world." However, not everything was sweet and tranquil moments. The news of the relationship between the heir to Carter Enterprises and a simple bookseller began to circulate in the city's social circles. Aunt Beatrice, in particular, hadn't given up on her objections. "Ethan, darling," she said, as she entered his office without warning, as she always did. "We need to talk about this phase of yours." "It's not a phase, Aunt," he replied without taking his eyes off the documents he was analyzing. "And we've already talked about this. But you need to think about the future of the company. The board is concerned. Your personal relationships affect the company's image, you know that." Ethan finally raised his eyes, his expression serious. "The board should be concerned about the fact that our latest social projects have generated more positive returns than any merger or acquisition. And do you know why? Because I learned from Olivia that success isn't measured only in numbers." His aunt seemed horrified. "You're letting this girl change your mind, Ethan. Think carefully." "I'm thinking more clearly than ever," he interrupted her, standing up. "And if you'll excuse me, I have an important commitment." The commitment in question was a dinner at Olivia's house. Sarah had insisted on cooking for him, wanting to get to know better the man who was making her daughter smile more than ever. When Ethan arrived, bringing a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers, he found the small apartment transformed. The table was set with the special dinnerware that was only used on very important occasions, and the delicious smell of homemade lasagna filled the air. "I hope you like Italian food," Sarah smiled, accepting the flowers. "It's the house specialty. I love it," he replied sincerely, noticing how Olivia was nervous, arranging and rearranging the cutlery. The dinner went surprisingly naturally. Ethan listened, fascinated to Sarah's stories about Olivia as a child, always with a book under her arm. He also shared his own memories, speaking for the first time about his mother and how her loss had deeply affected him. "She loved reading to me," he recounted, his voice soft with the memory. "I think that's why I felt so at home when I first entered the bookstore. That smell of books, it reminded me of her." Olivia held his hand under the table, feeling how that revelation had left him vulnerable. It was in these moments that she saw the real Ethan, not the powerful businessman, but the man who still carried the scars of his own losses. After dinner, while helping Olivia wash the dishes, ignoring her protests that he didn't need to do, this Ethan seemed thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, passing him a plate to dry. "About how strange it is," he replied with a small smile. "I've spent years dining at the most expensive restaurants in the world, but I've never felt so at peace as I do today here, washing dishes with you." Olivia laughed. "I never thought I'd see Ethan Carter with his hands in soap and water. There are many things you haven't seen about me yet," he replied, pulling her close, "and I can't wait to show you all of them." The next day, Olivia found an envelope on her desk at the bookstore. Inside were 2 invitations to one of the most important events of the business year, the Carter Enterprises Charity Gala dinner. Her heart raced. It was her first real test, entering Ethan's world, facing the looks and comments of high society. Was she ready for this? "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Ethan said softly, appearing behind her. "But I want you to know that I would be very proud to have you by my side." Olivia looked at the invitations in her hands, then at the man who had torn down all her walls with patience and love. Maybe it was time to do the same for him, face her fears and take a step towards his world. "I'm going to need a dress," she smiled nervously. "No," he corrected, kissing her forehead. "You just need to be yourself. That's more than enough." Sarah, who was discreetly observing the scene while attending to a customer, smiled to herself. Her daughter was finally learning that true love knows no social barriers, and that sometimes fairy tales happen not because one person changes to fit the other, but because both grow together, creating their own path. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Plaza Hotel shimmered with its sophisticated lighting and impeccable decor. Golden mirrors reflected the light from the crystals, creating an atmosphere of opulence that made Olivia feel as if she had entered another world. Standing in front of the mirror in one of the anterooms, she nervously adjusted the midnight blue dress that Sarah had helped choose, simple but elegant, like herself. "You look beautiful," Ethan whispered in her ear, appearing silently behind her. Dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, he looked even more imposing than usual, but his eyes maintained that special sparkle he reserved only for her. "I'm nervous," Olivia admitted, twirling the delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, a gift from her mother. "All these people, they're just people," he completed, taking her hand, "and none of them is more important than you." As they entered the main hall, Olivia felt all eyes turn to them. She recognized some faces from the business magazines that arrived at the bookstore, important entrepreneurs, politicians, celebrities. Aunt Beatrice was in a group near the entrance, and her look of disapproval was evident. "Ethan, darling," an elegant woman approached, her designer dress rustling. "How wonderful to see you, and this must be—" "Olivia," Ethan introduced her, with evident pride in his voice, "my girlfriend." The woman barely disguised her surprise, her eyes evaluating Olivia from head to toe. "Ah yes, the bookseller, how interesting." Before the moment could become more uncomfortable, they were saved by an elderly gentleman who approached with a genuine smile. "So you're the famous Olivia," he exclaimed with genuine warmth. "I'm Albert Carter, this young man's great-uncle. Ethan can't stop talking about you and your bookstore." Olivia immediately felt at ease with the kind-eyed gentleman. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Carter. Please, call me Albert. You know, my wife had a bookstore when we met. Everyone said a Carter shouldn't marry a simple shopkeeper, but those were the happiest 45 years of my life." Ethan smiled, squeezing Olivia's hand. She realized it was no coincidence that his great-uncle had approached at that moment. He was an unexpected ally. The night proceeded with its elaborate social choreography. Olivia observed how Ethan navigated easily between groups, always keeping her close, always including her in conversations. When dinner was served, she found herself seated between Ethan and Albert, who continued telling stories about the early days of Carter Enterprises. "You know, my dear," Albert commented as they savored dessert, "this company wasn't built just with money. It was built with values, with respect for people, something that some people seem to have forgotten along the way." His meaningful look towards Aunt Beatrice, who was animatedly conversing with a young woman Olivia discovered to be the famous Amanda Rothstein, didn't go unnoticed. After dinner, when the orchestra began to play, Ethan led her to the dance floor. "You're doing wonderfully well," he murmured as they danced. "Your great-uncle is amazing," she smiled. "He makes me feel that maybe I really can belong in this world." "You don't need to belong in this world," Ethan gently corrected. "We can create our own world." The music changed to a waltz and other couples joined them on the dance floor. Olivia noticed the looks, heard the whispers, but for the first time, she didn't care. In Ethan's arms, moving to the sound of the music, she felt safe, confident. The moment of peace was interrupted when Aunt Beatrice approached, Amanda Rothstein in tow. "Ethan, darling, Amanda was just commenting on the international expansion project. Why don't you dance a song with her? I'm sure Olivia doesn't mind resting a bit. Olivia felt Ethan tense, but before he could respond, she surprised him. Actually, Olivia said with a calmness she didn't know she possessed, we were just talking about how successful the company's social projects have been. Ethan told me about the community library being built in the new business complex. You know, studies show that access to literature can transform entire communities. Amanda blinked, surprised, while Aunt Beatrice looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Ethan looked at Olivia with even more admiration. That's exactly right, he agreed, pulling Olivia closer. In fact, Olivia has been an informal consultant on these projects. Her experience with literature and community has been invaluable. When Beatrice and Amanda walked away, defeated, Olivia let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I don't know where I got the courage for that. I do, Ethan smiled, proud. You've always had that strength inside you. You just needed to believe in it. Later, as the night was coming to an end, Ethan took her to the hotel's balcony. The city sparkled below them, and the cool night air was a relief after the crowded ballroom. You're amazing, he said, turning her to face him. I knew you would be, but you exceeded all my expectations. I thought it would be harder, Olivia admitted, but then I realized something. All those people in there trying to impress each other, they're the ones who are insecure. When I understood that, I stopped being afraid. Ethan kissed her softly, and at that moment, with the city as a witness, Olivia knew she had passed her first big test. Not because she had impressed society or confronted Aunt Beatrice, but because she had remained true to herself in the process. On the way home, Ethan drove in silence, but his hand never left hers. Olivia looked out the window, replaying the events of the night when he spoke. I have a surprise for you. More surprises, she laughed. I think I've had enough excitement for one night. This one is different, he smiled mysteriously. But you'll only find out tomorrow. What Olivia didn't know was that Ethan's surprise would change not only their lives, but that of the entire community around the Whispered Pages bookstore. And that sometimes the greatest gestures of love are not made of grand declarations or expensive gifts, but of small revolutions that transform lives. The morning after the gala dinner, Olivia arrived at the bookstore as usual, still thinking about the events of the previous night. She was distracted organizing the newly arrived books when Ethan appeared, accompanied by his great-uncle Albert, and a woman she didn't know, carrying a folder full of documents. Good morning, Ethan smiled, kissing her softly. Ready for your surprise? Depends, she joked, curious about the presence of the companions. Should I be worried? Albert laughed, his kind eyes twinkling. Only if worry is synonymous with happiness, my dear. The woman accompanying them introduced herself as Sandra Torres, the architect responsible for several Carter Enterprises projects. She opened her folder on the bookstore counter, revealing plans and projects. Olivia, Ethan began, his voice mixing anxiety and excitement. Remember when you told me that your biggest dream was to transform the bookstore into a cultural center for the community? She nodded, remembering the conversation they had weeks ago when they were talking about dreams and aspirations. Well, he continued, I decided to help make that dream come true, but not alone, with you. Sandra began to show the projects. The Whispered Pages bookstore would be expanded to also occupy the neighboring building, which had been vacant for years. The space would be transformed into a cultural complex, with areas for literary workshops, a cafe library, a storytelling space for children, and even a small auditorium for cultural events. But how? Olivia asked, stunned by the grandeur of the project. The building next door belongs to Carter Enterprises, Albert explained. It was one of the first properties we acquired in the city. I was saving it for a special project, and I can't think of anything more special than this. The idea, Ethan explained, is to create a partnership. Carter Enterprises provides the space and the renovation, but you maintain total autonomy in management. We want to preserve the essence of what you've built here. Just give it more reach. Olivia looked at the projects with tears in her eyes. Sandra showed how the design would maintain original elements of the bookstore, just expanding and modernizing the space. The cafe would be decorated with old bookshelves, maintaining the cozy charm that customers loved so much. "There's one more thing," Ethan added, taking another document from the folder. "I want to transfer 50% of the bookstore's ownership to your mother's name." "What?" Olivia exclaimed, surprised. "Sarah told me how she worked her whole life to support you and the bookstore, how she believed in your dream when no one else did. She deserves to be officially part of this." At that moment, as if it had been planned, Sarah entered the bookstore accompanied by Joe from the bakery and Rose from the flower shop. "You knew?" Olivia asked, seeing their knowing smiles. "Of course we knew, honey," Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "Ethan consulted us about the project. He wanted to make sure it would respect the neighborhood's history and the community's needs." Joe approached the counter, looking at the projects. "Look at that. There's going to be a cafe. I've already offered to supply the bread and pastries. And I'm going to take care of the flower arrangements," Rose completed, radiant. "I've always dreamed of having a fixed space for my flowers." Olivia looked from one face to another, overwhelmed, thereby how everyone she loved was united in this project. But one concern still bothered her. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's a wonderful project, but I don't want people to think I'm with you out of interest. Or that—" "Olivia," he gently interrupted her, "this project isn't a gift from me to you. It's an investment by Carter Enterprises in culture and education. The only difference is that instead of hiring someone to manage it, we're lucky to have you, someone who has already proven her worth and commitment to the community." "He's right," Albert intervened. "At the board meeting last night after the gala dinner, the project was unanimously approved. Even Beatrice voted in favor after we showed the projections of social and economic return." Sandra began to explain more details of the project. There would be reading incentive programs for public schools, creative writing workshops, literary meetings. The space would also be used for exhibitions by local artists and cultural presentations. "And the best part," Ethan added, "is that you'll have total freedom to develop the programming. We want you to maintain your vision, your essence. What we're doing is just providing the structure for more people to have access to this." Olivia looked around the bookstore, at the shelves she knew so well, at the corners where so many stories had already been shared. She imagined the space transformed, but maintaining its soul, its purpose. "When do we start?" she finally asked, a smile illuminating her face. The answer came in the form of hugs and celebrations. Joe ran to the bakery and returned with a cake he had prepared especially for the occasion. Rose distributed flowers to everyone. Albert opened a bottle of champagne he had brought hidden. While everyone celebrated, Olivia pulled Ethan to a quiet corner of the bookstore. "How do you do it?" she asked, her eyes misty. "Do what?" "Make everything seem possible. Transform dreams into reality without destroying their essence." Ethan smiled, touching her face affectionately. "I learned from you that the best dreams are those we share. This project isn't just mine or yours. It's for everyone who loves this place, this community." From across the bookstore, Sarah observed the couple with maternal eyes. Her heart overflowed with joy to see how her daughter had found not only love, but someone who truly understood and respected her. The doorbell chimed again, and more. People from the neighborhood began to arrive, attracted by the small celebration. Soon the bookstore was full of laughter, conversations, and plans for the future. Olivia realized that Ethan had given her much more than a surprise. He had shown that it was possible to unite different worlds without losing the authenticity of either of them. And as she watched the people she loved sharing their dreams and hopes, Olivia knew she was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. The small bookstore that her mother had maintained with so much sacrifice was about to transform into a beacon of culture and knowledge for the community, proving that sometimes the greatest gestures of love are those that benefit not just two people, but everyone around them. The months that followed brought new energy to the neighborhood. The renovation of the building next to the bookstore progressed rapidly, but with special care not to interfere with the normal operation of whispered pages. Olivia watched in wonder as each detail of the project took shape, always with Ethan by her side, ensuring that everything respected her original vision. "Look at this," she exclaimed one afternoon, showing Ethan the drawings that the neighborhood children had made to decorate the future children's space. They're so excited about the idea of story time that they've already started creating their own stories. Ethan smiled, picking up one of the colorful drawings. It was an adorable representation of the bookstore, with flying books and a girl who was clearly Olivia telling stories to a group of children. Did you know that Alice, who made this drawing, had never been in a bookstore before? Olivia continued, her eyes shining. Her mother said she now asked to come here every day after school, just to look at the books in the window. And that's why this project is so important, Ethan responded, hugging her from behind as they watched workers installing new shelves in the expanded space. It's not just about books or culture, it's about creating possibilities. The news of the bookstore's expansion had spread through the neighborhood, and everyone wanted to participate in some way. Joe would not only provide bread for the cafe, but also offered to give traditional cooking workshops in the multi-purpose space. Rose, in addition to the flowers, would organize floral arrangement workshops for the neighborhood ladies. You know what moves me the most? Sarah commented one night as she and Olivia organized the new cultural programs. Seeing how people are coming together. The neighborhood has always been united, but now it's different. There's a common purpose. Olivia agreed, thinking about how the last few weeks had transformed not only the physical space, but also the relationships between people. Even Aunt Beatrice, who had shown up unexpectedly for an inspection, had left impressed with the project. I confess I underestimated you, she had said to Olivia, observing the plans for the literature workshops. Ethan has always had a good eye for business, but this time he managed to combine that with something truly meaningful. The most touching moment, however, came when Albert brought a special surprise, old photos of the bookstore that had belonged to his wife. It was very similar to yours, he commented, showing the black and white images to Olivia and Ethan. Clara also transformed that space into more than just a store. It was a meeting point, a place where people felt at home. How did your wife deal with criticism from society? Olivia asked softly, knowing that their story was similar to hers with Ethan. She used to say that people only criticize what they don't understand. Albert smiled, his eyes lost in memories. Over time, even the most skeptical realized that our love had created something special for the city. On a particularly busy morning, while supervising the installation of new armchairs in the reading area, Olivia found Ethan absorbed in thought, looking out the window that faced the busy street. A penny for your thoughts, she joked, approaching. I was thinking about how funny life is, he replied, pulling her close. I entered this bookstore, looking for a book, and found a greater purpose. You showed me that success isn't measured just by numbers on a spreadsheet, but by the impact we have on people's lives. And you showed me that we don't need to give up who we are to grow, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder, that we can dream big without losing our essence. The sound of children's laughter caught their attention. A group of neighborhood children had gathered outside, curiously observing the movement. Olivia smiled, remembering herself as a child, dreaming of stories and adventures between the pages of books. Hey, you guys, she called, opening the door. Want to help organize the new children's section? The little faces lit up at the proposal, and soon the bookstore was full of enthusiastic little helpers, each carefully carrying a book to its new place on the colorful shelves. Ethan observed the scene with a full heart. Olivia was in her element, guiding the children with that unique mixture of affection and wisdom that characterized her. It was in these moments that he was absolutely certain their love wasn't just about the two of them, it was about creating something bigger, something that would continue touching lives long after their story became just another book on the shelves of whispered pages. In the evening, after the last worker had gone home and the children had returned to their houses, Olivia and Ethan sat in the new reading area, still covered with protective tarps. Sarah had prepared a special dinner for the three of them, and they ate while planning the final details for the grand opening. Have you decided which story you're going to tell at the opening? Ethan asked, knowing that Olivia was planning a special storytelling session to mark the event. I was thinking of creating a new one, she replied, her eyes shining with that look he knew so well, the look of someone about to share something special. A story about how books can unite different worlds, about how true love knows no barriers. About us, he completed softly. About all of us, she corrected, looking around the space that would soon be full of life, shared stories and dreams. Because in the end, isn't that what the best stories do? Show us that we're all part of something bigger. Sarah, who was silently knitting in her new favorite armchair, smiled as she overheard the conversation. Her daughter had found not just love, but also her true purpose. And sometimes, she thought, the greatest miracles happen not when we change who we are, but when we find someone who helps us be the best version of ourselves. The day of the inauguration of the new Whispered Pages cultural complex dawned with radiant sunshine. Olivia woke up early, her heart racing with anticipation for the big day. When she arrived at the bookstore, she found Rose already decorating the space with her most beautiful flower arrangements, while the aroma of Joe's fresh bread filled the air. "Everything is perfect," Sarah smiled, adjusting the new dress that Olivia had insisted on buying for the occasion. "Exactly as you always dreamed." Olivia looked around, marveling at the transformation. The space had doubled in size, but maintained that coziness that had always been the bookstore's trademark. The old shelves had been restored and complemented with new ones, creating a perfect balance between tradition and modernity. The cafe library, with its rustic wooden tables and comfortable armchairs, looked like it had come straight out of a fairy tale. "Actually," Olivia replied, hugging her. "Mother, it's much better than I dreamed." Ethan arrived shortly after, accompanied by Albert and, to everyone's surprise, Aunt Beatrice. The change in the lady's posture was visible. Her look of disdain had been replaced by genuine curiosity. "Impressive," she commented, observing the space. "You've managed to create something truly special here." The public began to arrive. Neighborhood, families, old bookstore customers, representatives from local schools, journalists. The children immediately ran to the children's area, where a storyteller was already waiting for them for the first official session. Olivia climbed onto the small stage of the auditorium, her initial nervousness dissipating as she saw so many familiar and smiling faces in the audience. Ethan was in the front row next to Sarah, his eyes conveying all the love and pride he felt. "Welcome to the new Whispered Pages," she began, her voice soft but firm. "When I started working in this bookstore with my mother years ago, we had a simple dream: to create a space where stories could transform lives. Today, thanks to the support of special people, that dream has grown and transformed into something even more beautiful." She continued, telling how each element of the new space had been designed to serve the community. The literature workshops for underprivileged children, the reading groups for the elderly, the creative writing workshops, the space for local artists. Every detail had been planned with care and purpose. "But today," she smiled, "I want to share a special story with you. A story about how true love can break down barriers and create bridges between different worlds." And so Olivia began to tell her own story. The story of a simple bookseller who fell in love with a businessman, and how that love had transformed not only their lives, but an entire community. The children sat on the floor, absorbed in every word. The adults listened emotionally, many recognizing their own contributions to that narrative. When she finished, Ethan climbed onto the stage, taking her hand. "This story," he said to the audience, "taught me that true success isn't measured by numbers in a bank account, but by the impact we have on people's lives. Olivia and this community showed me that the greatest treasures aren't those we can buy, but those we build together." The inauguration continued with cultural presentations, workshops, and much celebration. Joe's Cafe was an instant success, his traditional recipes delighting everyone. Rose couldn't stop receiving compliments on her arrangements, and already had a waiting list for her floral art workshops. At the end of the day, when the last guests had already left, Olivia and Ethan walked through the quiet space, absorbing the energy of the place. They stopped in front of the new sign at the entrance, which read, "Whispered Pages Community Cultural Center." "You know what I love most about you," Ethan said softly, hugging her from behind. How you transform everything you touch into something special. You didn't just change my life, Olivia. You showed all of us that the most beautiful dreams are those we share. Olivia turned in his arms, tears of happiness in her eyes. And you showed me that sometimes we need to give the unexpected a chance, that the best chapters of our lives can begin when we least expect it. Across the street, Sarah watched the couple through the window of her new home, a ground-floor apartment that Ethan had insisted on buying to make her mobility easier. Her heart overflowed with joy to see how her daughter had blossomed, how her small dream of a bookstore had transformed into something so grand and meaningful. The city lights began to come on, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. Inside the bookstore, the books on the shelves seemed to whisper their own stories, promising new adventures for all who entered. On the main wall, a phrase in golden letters shone softly: "Because the best stories are those we write together." And so on that magical night, Whispered Pages began a new chapter. It was no longer just a bookstore, nor just a cultural center. It was a living testimony to how true love can transform dreams into reality, and how the most beautiful stories are those that touch not just two hearts, but an entire community. Olivia. And Ethan had proven that when love is true, there is no social barrier or prejudice that can stop it. More than that, they had shown that sometimes destiny presents us with exactly the person we need to become the best version of ourselves. And as in every good book, this was not an end, but just the beginning of a new story, a story that would continue to be written every day, with every child's smile discovering a new book, with every elderly person sharing their memories, with every young writer discovering their voice. A love story that, like the best classics, would continue to inspire generations. Dear readers, we hope that Olivia and Ethan's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. You can find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story warmed your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and love. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching us from and share your own love story with us. Until next time.